Hello, my name's Jeremy Griffith. I'm an Australian biologist and the author of this book, Freedom, the End of the Human Condition. I want to start by posing a question. What would you do if the most wonderful gift you could absolutely ever dream of became available to you, yet there was a thick wall blocking your access to it? But you were given some instructions that would allow you to get through that wall. You would follow those instructions to the letter, wouldn't you? Well, that's exactly the situation I want to now describe. The greatest of all goals of the human race, in fact, it's been our species' great hope, faith and trust, is that one day we would find the redeeming, reconciling and psychologically healing biological understanding of our good and evil conflicted human condition. As the renowned Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson has written, and you can find the source of all the quotes I use in the transcript. The human condition is the most important frontier of the natural sciences. And in another of his books, there is no grail more elusive or precious in the life of the mind than the key to understanding the human condition. Well, as will be revealed in the next two short videos, that most precious in the life of the mind breakthrough of the biological understanding of the human condition has been found. So this is the most momentous event in the whole of human history, where each and every human can now be transformed from having to live a life where in truth everything is just so desperate, disappointing, meaningless, hopeless, depressing, tiring, hurtful and false, to a life where every situation, every person, absolutely everything can now be flooded with meaningful understanding and the relief, excitement, enthusiasm, peace, togetherness and happiness it brings. So all the confusion, insecurity and uncertainty, all the darkness of our lives can go, and we can be free of the agony of the human condition. And solving the human condition doesn't just bring relief, immense relief and happiness to our personal situations. It solves all the world's problems at the source. It's the key to ending the dystopia we live in of polarized politics, failed economies, rampant greed, corruption, hate, conflict, inequality, envy, starvation, overpopulation, mess, refugee floods and terrorism, and everywhere environmental devastation. It will solve family breakdown, drugs, obesity, epidemic levels of loneliness and depression and mental illness. And it'll end all the extreme anxiety that's now paralysing younger generations with their grey clothing and here comes the end of the world hoodies, their psychosis-crippled zombie parades in the street, and their understandable, too much unbearable pain in the brain, snowflake short attention spans, which really all herald our headlong plunge to the psychotic death of our species. So you can see that this rehabilitating understanding of the human condition is absolutely the most wonderful of gifts for every person and for the whole world. So yes, with the human condition at last resolved and our existence finally made sense of, everything can now be fixed and brought back to life. That's the magnitude of the gift that's on offer. But now, and this is very important, there's a very serious problem, which is that virtually everyone will find this world-saving and life-transforming explanation of the human condition initially impossible to access. I emphasize, initially impossible to access. Now, why this happens is because even though the human condition has been, as Wilson said, the most precious in the life of the mind and thus most important of all issues to solve, it's also been the most terrifying of subjects to face. And this fear makes our mind so afraid it can't absorb discussion of the issue. and so can't discover. It's finally been explained and made safe to confront, which means we can't derive all the fabulous benefits of the explanation. So as soon as discussion of the human condition begins, the mind of virtually everyone starts blocking out what's being said because its prior experience of where it's being asked to go has been too terrifying. The situation is akin to giving someone who suffers from a fear of snakes a book that will free them of their phobia. But as soon as they open the book and see descriptions and images of snakes, they fearfully slam it shut. I mean, their fear blocks them from being able to access the book's cure. People bandy around the term human condition often enough, which does give the impression that there's nothing particularly fearful about it. But that superficial treatment of the subject is part of the denial we practice to protect ourselves from just how terrifying the issue really is. The scientist Blaise Pascal spelt out the true horror of our species' contradictory nature or condition when he wrote, "What a chimera, multifaceted being, then is man. What a novelty, what a monster, what a chaos, what a contradiction. What a prodigy, judge of all things, imbecile worm of the earth, repository of truth, a sewer of uncertainty and error, the glory and the scum of the universe." William Shakespeare was equally revealing of the paradoxical nature of the human condition when he wrote, "What a piece of work is man, how noble of reason, how infinite in faculty, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights me not." So this extraordinary dichotomy that Pascal and Shakespeare have written about is what the human condition really is. We humans embody the extreme contradiction of being the most brilliantly clever of creatures, the ones who are godlike in our infinite faculty of reason and apprehension, and yet we also behave in the seemingly completely unclever, monstrous, imbecile worm of the earth, sewer of uncertainty, scum of the universe, quintessence of dust way. Not only are we competitive, aggressive and selfish when the ideals of life are so obviously to be cooperative, loving and selfless, we are also the meanest, most vicious of species, the ones that are only too capable of inflicting pain and cruelty, suffering and degradation. As the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "Man is the only animal which causes pain in others with no other objective than causing pain. No animal ever torments another for the sake of tormenting, but man does so. And it is this which constitutes the diabolical nature, which is far worse than the merely bestial." Yes, as I'll explain in the third and fourth videos of this series, we humans have been living with a horrific injustice that's caused such volcanic frustration and anger in us that we have been capable of behaving far more viciously than other animals. And it's precisely that deep injustice, which I'll tell you now, is the implication that we are vile and worthless creatures when we haven't believed we are, but couldn't explain why we aren't. That this explanation of the human condition reaches to the bottom of and brings relieving understanding to. But without that relieving understanding, our often ferocious and vile behaviour has seemed to indicate that we are, as Pascal described, as the scum of the universe. And trying to face that seemingly irrefutable conclusion has been sheer terror for our minds and has led to absolutely unbearable, in fact suicidal depression. Indeed, our fear of facing the seemingly irrefutable conclusion that we are the scum of the universe has been so great. It's taken the minds of some of the world's greatest philosophers to even articulate that fear. I mean, that's how great this fear has been. We can hardly even bring ourselves to mention it. So a reviewer wrote that it is widely regarded that the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard's analysis of the nature of despair is one of the best accounts on the subject, with the nature of despair being as close as the reviewer could go in referring to the worse-than-death suicidal depression that the subject of the human condition has historically caused humans, but which Kierkegaard managed to give such an honest account of in his aptly titled book, The Sickness Unto Death. The torment of despair is precisely the inability to die and end the torture of our previously unexplained human condition. That despair is the sickness unto death. This tormenting contradiction, which is our good and evil human condition afflicted lives, this sickness of the self, eternally to die and yet not to die. Yeah, that's how suicidally depressing the issue of the human condition has been. So it follows then that to confront the until now unexplained human condition has been an impossible task for virtually everyone. As another great philosopher, Nikolai Berdyaev, acknowledged, knowledge requires great daring. It means victory over ancient primal terror. It must also be said of knowledge that it is bitter, and there is no escaping that bitterness. Particularly bitter is moral knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. But the bitterness is due to the fallen state of the world. There is a deadly pain in the very distinction of good and evil, of the valuable and the worthless. That's been the absolutely unbearable question. Are we humans so awful that we actually are worthless? In his appropriately titled poem, No Worse There Is None, the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins similarly wrote, "Oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of fall, frightful sheer, no man fathomed," articulating just how fearfully confronting and depressing the previously unfathomed issue of the human condition has been. So again, while we couldn't explain and understand it, that is how terrifying the subject of our corrupted or fallen human condition has really been. And it's why virtually all humans had absolutely no choice but to resign themselves to blocking the issue out of their minds, not allowing themselves to confront it. So, given this extreme commitment to blocking the issue out, when that most sought after of all gifts for the human mind, that fabulous, all redeeming and all transforming and all relieving understanding of ourselves that Wilson described as the most precious in the life of the mind, holy grail of science, of understanding the human condition, is finally found, as the third video in this series will explain that it now has been. You need to be aware that your mind will be too afraid of the subject to effectively take in and absorb analysis of it. An extreme deaf effect, as we've come to describe it, to what's being said will occur in your mind. The obvious question then is, how can you overcome the problem of being unable to absorb and hear discussion of the human condition so that you can access the incredibly relieving gift that the understanding brings? Now, the answer that many years of experience has taught me and many others is that the way to overcome the deaf effect is through patient perseverance. What will happen as you continue to listen to discussion of the human condition is that the reassuring logic of the explanation will start to ease your subconscious fear of the subject, and before long you'll find that you can actually take in or hear what's being said without encountering any of the problems you initially experienced. If you're patient and persevere, your mind will start to realise that this previously terrifying subject has actually been made safe to confront, and it will start to relax and take in what's being said. I might mention, and this is something absolutely astonishing, way back during the golden age of Greece in 360 BC, the very great philosopher Plato gave the most truthful and penetrating account that's ever been given of the human condition. In it, he described humans, and most of what I'm going to be reading are actually quotes from what he wrote. So in it, he described humans as living in such fear of the human condition, and that's the earliest mention I've seen of the term human condition, living in such fear of the human condition that we've had to metaphorically hide a long way underground in a dark cave, so none of the painful light outside the cave can reach us, because it would make visible the imperfections of human life. Even predicting the death effect by saying that when someone finally escapes from the cave into the light of day, and from there finds understanding of the human condition, and then tries to help the cave prisoners escape into the sun-filled setting outside the cave, that our minds would be so completely frozen with fear that he said we wouldn't be able to see a single one of the things we were now told were real. At least not at first, because we need to grow accustomed to the light of the truthful understanding. Amazing. I present a much more detailed account with sources of Plato's amazingly truthful description of our fear of the human condition and its effects in video 11 of this series. Yeah, he said we wouldn't be able to see a single one of the things we're now told are real. That's the extent of the death effect. To illustrate the effectiveness of persevering and as Plato said, growing accustomed to the light, a reviewer of this fully accountable, all-explaining and all-solving analysis of the human condition that I'll be presenting a short summary of in the third video wrote this. When I first came across this information, it was not an easy read. The core concepts kept slipping from my mental grasp. At the time, I put it down to bad writing. However, a second reading revealed something the author had indicated from the outset. Your mind doesn't want to understand the content. Actually, confront the content. The second read was quick and painless, and I was then able to see that the cause of the malaise of humans, is exposed, remedied, and the reader is left with, at the very least, an understanding of themselves, and for me, something of an optimism for the future. Many more almost identical descriptions of the difficulty of the death effect and how you need to be prepared to persevere if you're to overcome it are also presented in video 11. I might mention that this reviewer's initial thinking that the reason he found it hard to grasp what was being said was because of bad writing occurs with nearly everyone. And this is because being unaware that we've been living in denial of what's being talked about, we can't help but think the problem has to be the presentation. At this point, I'd like to ask Tony Gowing, who's a founding member of the World Transformation Movement, which is the movement that supports this breakthrough understanding, to describe his experience with the death effect and the excitement that lies on the other side of it. So, Tony, if you could come and sit here.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, in my case, I actually inadvertently overcame the death effect, because my best mate's sister is an active supporter of the World Transformation Movement. And when I was at university, I often went with him when he visited her at the WTM. At first, I only took a vague interest in their discussions about the explanation of the human condition because, like the reviewer you just mentioned, I also found it very difficult to grasp what they were saying. Luckily for me, after happening to listen in on a number of their conversations, what they were all saying started to become clear. And then to my amazement, the whole explanation of us humans seemed so straightforward, and it actually seemed obvious. Getting through the death effect is really like walking out of a fog. And Wilson's description of the biological explanation of the human condition being the most precious thing in the life of our mind is just so true. Man, I mean, have we been living in a fog? Because once you get through it, being able to understand everything is really and truly just so precious. So here I am, more than 20 years later, an extremely excited, full-time supporter of the WTM, who's deeply relieved to understand and have hope for the world. And best of all, for me personally, to be free of the effects of the human condition in myself. I tell you, this understanding does bring about an end to all the pain, all the suffering, all the confusion, insecurity and uncertainty. I know why we are the way we are, and I know why the world's been so mean and full of pain, and why there now can be the most wondrous change of heart in every single human being, completely from being completely consumed by an incredibly insecure, mad, terrified, obsessively egocentric and selfish mindset, to a completely 100% secure person living an all-meaningful, wildly exciting existence dedicated to helping make this great change from darkness and pain to an all-understanding state of freedom from the human condition. And what I'm talking about is not another deluded, New Age type or politically correct, dogma-based, pseudo-idealistic false start to the human condition-free new world that the human race has lived in hope and faith and trust would one day be possible. No, this is, as Wilson said, the science, understanding-based relief for the human mind that actually brings about that dreamed of transformation of all our lives. We conscious humans needed to be able to understand our way to freedom from our distressed condition. We needed relieving answers for our mind. And as Jeremy often says, we needed brain food, not brain anaesthetic. And now, at last, and in the nick of time, we have it. Honestly, the wonder and the relief of this biological insight is just endless.
Thanks very much, Tone. And you can hear much more from Tony in video 5. In the next video, I'll describe the dishonest and extremely dangerous excuse that we've been using for the human condition. And in the video after that, which is the third video, I'll present this all redeeming and all transforming, human race saving biological explanation of the human condition. So thank you for watching, and I hope you continue to watch these videos.
I have no doubt this biological explanation of Jeremy Griffiths of the human condition is the holy grail of insight we have sought for the psychological rehabilitation of the human race.
It is the most profound piece of work I've ever read, and I've read a lot.
This understanding of the human condition will end all prejudices like racism forever.
The clarity of it is euphoric.
This explanation brings about the true liberation of women and the reconciliation of the sexes, which, I mean, it's truly extraordinary.
It has to be the most important book ever written.